Thank you all for joining us today for our inaugural episode. We're really excited to be discussing one of our top 10 IT issues at EDUCAUSE and a showcase topic, smooth sailing for the student experience. And we have invited our colleagues from the University of Florida and Arizona State University here today because they're doing some really exciting and creative work related to student experience in higher ed. So thank you all for joining us in our very official studio today.
Thank you so much, Sophie.
Thank you.
I guess as we get started, how are you all doing? I know that the academic year is just getting started. Students are returning to campus. How's everyone doing today? And, anything that you're thinking of related to student experience work?
We are hanging in there. Campus is really busy. School's already started back up, and there's a hurricane on the way that will hit tomorrow. And there's a car on fire outside. So it's been an interesting.
So I feel like the metaphorical fires are under control, but we have a few literal fires right now that we're working on.
Yeah.
Wow.
Fires are a good thing because we had a dorm on fire last week. So that's cool. Can we do like a screenshot of the dumpster fire meme? That just going across. But I mean,
that's perfect. The little guy that's standing there just saying, "This is fine."
Yes, exactly.
Explain. Well, I hope that doesn't define the 2023 academic year as literal and metaphorical fires. No, that's great. And I know that, as we're thinking about this showcase, we're talking about everything from, faculty supporting the student learning experience in the classroom in different modalities. And also artificial intelligence is really just becoming the forefront of the discussions related to technology in higher ed. So I know, Chris and Leslie, you've been working on this really cool cookbook project. And I was reviewing some of the prompts that you had as part of your recipes before this discussion today. And I just thought that your metaphors of combining generative AI, prompt engineering to cooking were so creative and fun. And I also loved all of the little, I can send a link later, but I loved all of the little gator graphics that you added into the cookbook itself. So, if you want to talk about that at all, I would love to hear more.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun doing that. But for some context, Chris and I are part of a centralized IT department at the university, and we're often tasked with trying to come up with trainings and services that will reach a lot of people. And we have a series that we call the Tech Bite series, where we deliver these short, digestible info sessions that faculty will have some kind of action item to follow through with. And Chris and I we work together a lot, and our kids are the same age. We're just always kind of on the same wavelength. And one day we were just chatting about Rachel Ray cookbook.
Oh, right. The 30-minute meals.
Yes.
The inspiration for that.
Yeah. So we did a quite a while ago with 30-minute recipes to increase instructor presence. And that one went really well. And then we started to think about AI and how scary it is for a lot of people. There's just so much fear around it, not knowing the ethics or how students are using it, how I can use it, how to get started. So we decided to do a Tech Bite session where we made it fun. It was a cooking show where we came up with recipes that faculty could grab and go and start designing a course, start creating assignments. And we were in our tech kitchen, which was in here, but it was green screen. Like we wore aprons and everything.
Yeah, we're in a studio here, and they helped us set all that up. I have my work apron now that I keep in my office because now it's only for Tech My Kitchen rather than an actual kitchen. But the thought is that we could take something that was scary and put it in a context that felt familiar and in a format that was easy to digest. And by having these recipes, we could lower the barrier to entry for people, because what we were seeing was a lot of people that had read about AI and read about generative AI and what it can do, but they never actually tried it themselves. And one of the best indicators for like understanding and proficiency with these tools is experience. And so we're like, how do we help people and faculty especially get some experience with this and then translate it into experiences for their students? And so we made this cookbook of things that they could copy and paste and kind of get started right away in something that would be productive and not just for fun.
And one more thing, these recipes were often faculty facing, so we're coming up with recipes for instructors, but in there we had a section on items that they could share with their students to help foster some more self-directed learning so that students could create their own study materials, their own quizzes. They could use generative AI as a study buddy to learn a language or practice in some kind of role-playing capacity. So even though our audience is usually faculty, we try to embed opportunities in there for them to grab something and share with their students to get started.
I really like your cookbook. I was looking through it yesterday, and one of the things I liked was the setup of we're not cooks. Like, but the other thing for me personally is that I teach a class for pre-service teachers, and I've been trying to think of ways to bring in some AI and have them kind of practice with it, because I do see it as a tool for teachers. And so when I was looking at your cookbook, I mean, I'm definitely going to use it as a resource, because I think that it does bring some value into how do you gently bring AI in and, start to foster some new ideas with it.
Yeah, it's something that, I've been approached to talk to several county school boards about, what does AI mean for them and their teachers? Like, what stance should the school board take? Should they be offering any resources for their teachers to use generative AI? Should they offer any guidance? And so this idea of, hey, teachers can use this to help do some of the administrative work so they could focus on the teaching, like anything that could take up some of that burden to make that teaching experience better and spend more time connecting with students and figuring out how to plan lessons around objectives and standards. That's an interesting way to move some of that workload from one place to another.
Right.
As I've talked to people about this idea of offloading some of those tasks that we don't want to do onto generative AI, and then I think the dream is then we take that free time and we can solve all the world's problems and just tackle all the big things, right? But a colleague recently reminded me, this is probably going to be more like the invention of the modern washing machine. So we created this tool that took this massive thing off of our to-do list, but really that time is probably just going to get filled up with other things. I'm just wondering what everyone else feels about that. And is anyone trying to kind of be purposeful about filling in that free time, those new spaces that are created? I know I'm not doing a great job at it personally, but maybe someone has some tips.
Interesting question, because I do think that it makes certain things more efficient. So as an instructional designer, I was using it, when was it? Thursday? And I had an instructor give me a series of course goals for a course, but I knew that there were some pieces in our conversation that were missing that I had jotted down some notes, but then I ran it through ChatGPT to say, okay, I know I want to include more about advocacy in these course goals around the topic we were discussing. And so I basically am describing it to it as my assistant, and it helped me come up with some ideas. It's not that, like, I could ponder more on that throughout the day, but I find personally in my work that it's a really great place to get something started on paper, and then I can move forward. It's not that it's taking it away from me just yet, but it's helping me get started in a better place than me sitting there thinking for a few hours. But
and one of the things that I look at when I see this generative AI is that I don't necessarily try to think of it as time savers, but as a way to enable new types of activities, new types of things that we don't do because they would take up so much time. Things like that one-on-one study buddy experience or role-playing or debate. These are the kinds of activities that we can enable in courses and that faculty can use with students that, it's not that it saves a faculty member time, but it creates new experiences that wouldn't be really feasible or scalable without generative AI.
Right. And that's kind of where I'm looking to, is that critical thinking piece. How do we compare our own thoughts and what we're thinking and putting out, let's say, onto paper, and in my case, in assignments, and what does ChatGPT bring out? And how do you compare those two? And what are the pieces that you're missing? What is ChatGPT missing? And how do you start to create something out of both of those ideas?
Yeah, that really gets at something for me that is kind of around that idea that how do we leverage this tool to push forward those things we know are good pedagogical practices anyway. We know this is the way teaching and learning should work. But how do, instead of seeing this as this massive disruption thing that we just have to deal with, how do we leverage that to really engage in those practices that we've been trying to engage in all along?
Yeah, I think it gives the person a way of kind of moving themselves out of their own box, right? Their own mental box. And it really pushes them to think a little bit further through the ideas that are provided in ChatGPT or whatever AI generative tool.
Yeah, so one of the assignments that I've been playing with an instructor is it's a writing course, and one of the core UF writing requirements for a number of words they need to write during their undergraduate career. And one of the things he wants to do is writing persuasive essays. And for him, it's a pretty large class. If students were to write persuasive essays, he wouldn't have time to necessarily go through and provide a counter argument or ask a clarifying question, have students write responses. But we could automate some of that using tools like ChatGPT for students to submit a persuasive argument, for an AI to ask a clarifying question, maybe offer a counterpoint, and for students to address that. So the idea of those pedagogical practices, what's some of the most effective tools, and that's we want students to think about their arguments and to defend their arguments. It's hard to do that at scale, but we can use AI to bring in these experiences that to larger classes that used to be only feasible in smaller experiences.
That's fascinating. I never would have thought of that use case for it, but it makes a lot of sense. And I think, what we were talking about with this issue is how students are used to this maybe consumer experience of getting immediate feedback on something you type into a chat bot, for example. So being able to bring that into the classroom and have this back and forth is so powerful.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that you bring up that consumer mindset. It's something that we've talked about in our research at EDUCAUSE for the last couple of years now. I mean, I know personally in the research that I've been doing with students, it's become much more something that they talk about sort of blatantly, I guess is the best way I can put it. Like, I'm paying for X, I should get Y. Like, I haven't really heard students frame things quite in that way as clearly as they have been in the last few years. And I'm not sure what all the influencing factors are. I think a little bit of it was us sort of reevaluating what we want to do with our time and money. Like from 2020 to now, I think there's been a lot of re-examining our lives. But it's interesting you bring up that piece, Sophie, because I do see that coming in more and more with students.
I think in the pandemic, we had a lot of, well, we know this, a lot of people had to go online who weren't prepared to go online, at least at our institution. We had some who were more comfortable with it, some who've never touched it before. And I think that's probably when you hear a lot of students say, this isn't what I pay for, if this is what you call an online course, because it was overnight having to start that shift. I think we're in a much better place now. Everyone's been forced to play with it. And that brings us back to Chris's point earlier, is that we're going to be afraid of all of these technologies if we don't just press the buttons and play with it. And with generative AI, we polled the faculty before our session to ask if they've even played with it. And I think almost 50% hadn't had an opportunity yet to play with it, and they were,
despite reading about it, like
yes,
we've read
read
about
about it all day.
but they hadn't played with it.
Yeah. So being forced to adapt is sometimes just the best way, and you realize it's not so bad. Oh, sort of.
Well, and just as important as it is to get the faculty to embrace it and give them ways to use it, it's also important to look at how we're going to teach the next generation to use it effectively. Like, for example, we just got through hiring some student workers, and one of the pieces of that was reading a lot of cover letters that were written by ChatGPT, and you can just tell that it was written by ChatGPT and not really, massaged or anything before submitting. And so figuring out how do we start to build courses that are teaching students how to use it effectively, so they're not just going to it for the quick answer, right?
For sure. At University of Florida, we're working on projects to integrate AI across the curriculum, and I'm on the task force for our quality enhancement plan to that effect. And I would think, this is a personal statement, not a UF position. I think it'd be kind of a failure if a UF graduate didn't have an understanding of what AI's impacts are going to be on their abilities in the workforce. Like, I'm not saying that every student needs to be a programmer or every student needs to be a prompt engineer, but I think every student needs to be aware of AI and what it is capable of, and and its limitations at the time. And to that effect, some of the things that we've done are resources for students. We've offered like guest lecturing for capstone courses for people who are like about to enter the field. Our office will come in and speak to students about generative AI and create some applicable examples for that major or for that discipline.
We also have AI days at the university.
Oh, we do. That's right. AI Days comes up next month, where there's student showcases and poster sessions and hackathons. So something that's really student-centered, where students are getting to participate in teams and cross-disciplinary teams to explore what AI can do.
That's great. I know ASU just started a task force, and I'm not part of that task force, so I'm not sure exactly where they're going with everything, but they have started one up and making some progress.
Yeah, it all happens so quickly.
It does. But I mean, it also goes back to, the K-12, getting those students prepared to continue moving forward with the future of AI. And
yeah, one thing that's kind of made me think of talking about the faculty adoption too is that, and Jenay, let me know if I'm saying this wrong because you're the researcher, but we have this faculty and technology report that we just released at EDUCAUSE last week. And one metric that I thought was really interesting was that faculty, by a small margin, generally preferred to teach on-site, but they seemed more comfortable teaching in their non-preferred modality if it was helping their students. So, whether that's because students had a lifestyle that didn't allow them to attend classes on site, or if they had a disability accommodation that would help them to have a class in a different modality, faculty, in general seemed comfortable teaching in that modality if it were to support their students. So my sense is that faculty member want what's best for the students. And if our role as higher ed is teaching citizens how to interact in the world and with these new technologies, that, they'll work with us to do that.
What's even more interesting about that research is in the sort of parallel student study that I think just went live today. Am I right, Sophie? Yeah. That students kind of have this sentiment that by some slim majority will say, yeah, we prefer on-site courses. But I think it was like 80-something% of students, I have to grab the exact statistic, said that they believe that students should be able to learn in whatever modality is best for them. So it becomes, and I think we've seen this framed as an ethical question here at EDUCAUSE, but also with our colleagues across the world, which is that this becomes really an ethical question, and it becomes a question of what does it mean to be truly student-centered, being able to build in that flexibility. Of course, comes with a great cost, but at the same time seems really like that's what's aligned with our value system as higher educators.
Yeah, I think some flexibility in modality, needs to be adopted in some ways. One of the things that our office continues to encourage is that faculty members hold virtual student hours as part of the package, not just only offering in person, but especially when those hours are different parts of the day, that students have the opportunity to join virtually if needed, if they have other barriers to not being on campus and in a not useful time to them. So having virtual options, even if it's an in-person class for some things, I think is valuable. So we've promoted things like Microsoft Bookings and student hours being virtual, and just having that flexibility to meet students where they need to be met.
Right. One thing we've done to kind of help with some of those flexible modalities is we've kept our synchronous teaching opportunities that came over from the pandemic. And we built a few sync studios. And these studios provide a space for instructors to come and teach from. And it provides all of the technology so that they have multiple screens that they could see all of the students on. They have the neat boards, so they're standing at a standing desk or sitting, however they, want to make that. And it's a writable tablet, so they can do all of their work there. They also have a screen behind them that shows their presentation. So it gives a feel of being in a classroom, although they're teaching to synchronous remote students. It also has the confidence monitors, so they're, watching what they're doing. But it's just to kind of provide some more support to the faculty so that they have a space. They might be teaching in-person classes all day, but then also be teaching the synchronous course. So they're not just sitting in front of one computer. They have everything there to help them kind of create the feel of being where, they're most comfortable in the classroom. So.
At the University of Florida, every course has an online learning management system shell, is what we call them. We use Canvas here, so they always have some kind of representation in Canvas, even if it's a fully in-person course. The idea is to have another avenue of communication in there, your syllabus, materials that students can look at, even though you're meeting in person. So we're trying to, I think, look for opportunities to blend the modalities as much as we can. Our office works a lot on templates too, so that anybody who is teaching can have some items that they can grab and go that introduce students to the technology that they'll be using in the course. It'll include accessibility statements about all of the technology. There's a Start Here module that introduces the instructor and all of UF's resources and policies, and it's all modeled off of what we have here called the UF plus QM, which is our adaptation of the Quality Matters rubric, where we have all of the Quality Matters standards for quality courses plus some. So all of our templates that we share with faculty, we try to be very clear about which standards they're meeting by filling in that information in their course to make sure that they're present, that the course is accessible, that hopefully we're chunking content in a meaningful way. There's just a lot of hopefully guidance in the templates.
Also, Leslie, you've done a lot of work with like flipped advising to provide a different modality for students to get help from their advisors.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite projects. Can I talk about that? I used to be an advisor a long time ago before I was an instructional designer. And when I came over here, I was building online courses and thinking like, oh, how wonderful would it be if advisors could create this presence for their advising population to have, a way to connect to their advisor in the learning management system. They're already in there for their courses. There's a place for them to connect with other students in their program. Advisors are able to record videos answering some of those commonly asked questions and have access to all the forms and policies that they have to share with students. It's all in the learning management system so that students can easily look at it at any point. So it's modeled off of flipped learning, which is a format where instructors are putting all of the more, I guess, passive content in the learning management system, like the videos and the readings, so that class time is focused more on active learning. And there's group work and discussion and all of that. So flipped advising is that same model where all of the need to know information is in the LMS, and there may be some assignments in there where they fill out reflections or forms for their advisor, so that when the student arrives to the advising appointment, they can continue the conversation that was started in the LMS and have a more meaningful conversation about concerns that they wrote down in their reflections, or maybe the student made an academic plan that's not quite right, and so now is a chance for us to talk about that. And they're able to get access to what they need at any hour of the day instead of waiting for an advising appointment for one form or something like that. So our office now offers flipped advising developments in addition to standard course developments, and we get just as many requests for those as we do standard course development. So it's a very popular service here now. I'm really proud of it.
Yeah, it's really cool. I really like the modality choice that you're giving students and advisors, and making those personal connection times more meaningful.
Yeah, a lot of student services kind of depend on that in-person contact. You go to an office, or maybe you can go to the website and find where the office is. But the idea that we could just use the technology we already have to impact something other than a traditional classroom, I think helps us reach everyone and hopefully keep them on track from start to finish.
Yeah, I like that consistency with using the learning management system to support that, because the students are already familiar with it. It's not a new system they have to learn and try to figure out or, log into. They're already there. They know how to navigate.
All their to-dos can show up, there if you need them to. Appointment groups.
And for our team, we're already trained on how to design courses, so there wasn't a big lift for us to adapt for a new client. It's just, getting comfortable with what it might look like, and depending on the advisor to be the subject matter expert, just like a faculty member would be.
Yeah, I think this definitely lines up with the smooth sailing issue idea. So
Yes.
I think it's worth talking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Did you have to develop some special training for advisors on how to use this flipped model, or what did that look like?
Yeah. So in our office, when we're working on a full course development with someone, we often have faculty who have not used the learning management system before, at least before the pandemic. And they also need some training throughout. So what I usually do is I meet with them at the beginning of a semester, and we go through a process to really analyze the needs of their program, what their students will need in an advising course, what are some of the common questions that they get every single semester. And then we basically go through this course mapping process that we would a faculty member. So we start thinking about what are our goals here? What are our objectives? How does that start to form different modules for this course? And then we map out a timeline, and we meet usually every week or every other week to work on the modules together. They'll work on an outline. I'll build it in Canvas and kind of explain how I did it. And at the end of those developments, I'll sit down with them for a separate meeting and say, let's just practice everything in here. So click on the edit button. Here's how you add a link to this page. Here's how you post an announcement. And I treat them like I do every single client. I assume that maybe they know nothing. So we're just going to start from the beginning. And that's like a 1 or 2 hour training that I do with them. But we haven't developed anything for the entire campus because honestly, each advising course looks different. Like each regular course we develop, it really depends on number of advisors, number of students, milestones. So it's like a boutique service.
Yeah. White glove instructional design.
The chef's menu. Go for it. That's great.
Yeah.
And that talking about some of these programs that y'all have going on really sparks in my mind thinking about how even that definition of what is an on-site course, what is a hybrid course, these things are really shifting. We talk about this in the Horizon reports. The panelists are bringing this up a lot over the last year or two, where it's like, even if this is a piece of information that comes out of our student research, where even if a course is quote unquote fully on site, there's still this expectation and this need to have a bunch of things available online. And that really kind of begs the question, like, what even is an on-site experience at this point? Does that exist, a purely on-site course? I don't know.
I was just talking about this with one of my coworkers. The terminology that we use is probably not the same that another institution uses. Just like I might say course goals and another person says student learning outcomes. It's like, it really makes it tricky to talk about some of these things too, because I feel like so many institutions have different language.
Right. I think the modalities are definitely becoming part of this like larger Venn diagram of, even though there's these separate modalities, there's still these similarities that should be happening across all of them, right? And some of that is that online component. I think that's one, positive that the pandemic brought out was the value in having these learning management systems and faculty utilizing those systems so that they're not just expecting everything to be in person, but also providing students these resources outside of the classroom. And so for like our classrooms, we're all now Zoom enabled. So all of our classrooms have the technology capable of having those classes be online as well. So if, let's say, I just saw an alert today, I think that, cases are up again and different health concerns that are going around. And, we're now looking at how do we have these in-person classes, but also support, those who might need to be at home for a day or two, still be able to attend class. And, just the flexibility of being able to provide that and having that ready to go when needed.
I feel like that word flexibility could be like the theme from 2020 to 2023. And who knows how long we're going to, like, I don't have a single professional conversation that doesn't come back to that.
It's very true. We, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, one thing that we do in our office is we try to embed universal design for learning principles in a lot of the things that we're recommending to faculty as we design a course. And it brings, I feel like the idea that we might have an in-person course, but there's still some online presence, that's wonderful, because it means that we still have multiple means of expression and representation and all of the core principles of UDL, so that we can just hopefully support students in the way that they need, or we can, another popular word from the pandemic, pivot if we need to. So, no one
Unprecedented.
Leslie, if you use the word unprecedented, I can fill out my card. So
Yeah, maybe we need a bingo card for this show.
Yeah. I didn't want to say it, but I had to.
Yeah, definitely flexibility. We did a webinar last week on ERPs at institutions, and we wanted to make sure that we spent some time talking about what is a student, because even that, as we're considering this idea, smooth sailing for the student experience, this idea that a higher education student is an 18 to 22-year-old on-site student sitting in class and learning from a lecture is just so beyond, what our reality is now and where it's going. So, will students return to school 20 years after they graduate the first time to learn more about how to use artificial intelligence in their current roles? Or, we have students who are supporting families and attending online in different formats. So this idea of how we support students will vary and be flexible as time goes on.
Definitely. I think beyond the online space, we're also looking at one project that I worked on last semester, or actually 2 semesters ago if we include summer. But last spring was our flexible classrooms, and it was a pilot program where we had 7 classrooms that I was working with. And this isn't necessarily the technology in the space as far as, AV equipment, but this was the furniture technology and looking at the flexibility that we could bring with that and fostering optional, seating arrangements, whether it's an individual chair or seat with a desk, or we had tiered seating where we had one level of seats and then kind of bar table height in the very back, so it allows students to decide where are they most comfortable. We had swivel chairs, and then we also had a side table that I call the anchor space, where if there's too much going on and thinking through the neurodivergent students or students that just might be overwhelmed at the moment and need to step away, they have a place to go. So that, and, taking that word flexibility and not only looking at the flexibility in modality, but the flexibility just within the classroom space. And it also provided a lot of, refreshing, a feel of refreshment, I guess you could say, with the students and talking to them. I actually took one of the classrooms to teach in this semester with my students. And on the first day they walked in and you could just see the excitement. And it's nothing, it's just in that the color, it's more vibrant. They have new seats. We have whiteboards all over the walls so that they can, use those whiteboards during different activities. But just the idea of a new space or a new look to an old space was refreshing for the students and really motivating and engaging for them. And it was fun to watch them walk in, because last semester with the working on the project, I got to go in and just kind of see how the instructors were using the spaces and talk to the students, but to actually see my students coming in with that, excitement and talking to them. Again, these are pre-service teachers. So talking to them about, what made you excited? Like, there's not really much. I mean, it's just chairs and tables. What was the exciting factor? And so it was really that newness, right? Like, and just thinking about, I had to think through, because I was like, this is still a technology. It's not the AV technology or the AI technology that we, our minds are constantly on when we think of that word. But this is, the furniture is still a technology piece. And we still need to think through that as well for those in-person students.
So one of the things that UFIT has as an annual student tech fair where we have booths and they can meet some IT services and basically get some skills that they might need, like work on their resume or update their LinkedIn. Like, we'll help them with that. And a few years ago, we also had a design your classroom activity where we gave students whiteboards and had them like, what would be your ideal classroom? And they gave us lots of designs and lots of ideas on how they think, what their preferred classroom layout and furniture would be and what it would look like. And that was really interesting to see. But when we look at these interesting classrooms, the ones with like flexible furniture versus tiered seating, versus, the movable tables and all that, that one challenge I see that I don't have an answer for, but I like to think about is how do we do the matching of classrooms that have this furniture to teachers that would utilize it? Because sometimes there's a mismatch of someone who is lecturing and doesn't necessarily need the adaptable furniture versus a person who's trying to do team-based learning or active learning in a classroom with stadium seating and students can't move around in there to facilitate those types of activities. So I've always wondered, is there, what could be done at this registrar level when we're picking classrooms to indicate best fit classrooms? I don't know. It's been something I've thought about.
Yeah, no, that skill piece is, and that's something we've been working through is like, okay, we have these pilot classrooms. We reached out to all of the faculty who were going to be teaching in that classroom and gave them a heads up, like, this is what your classroom is going to look like. This is what we're encouraging you to do. You can make the decision whether you're going to stay in this space or you can choose another space. But that's just with 7 classrooms, right? Like, how do we scale that and make it, so that all faculty have those options as well, according to their teaching.
And as instructional designers, that adds another training for you. If you have to, train faculty members how to teach in a specific furniture formation, that's a really interesting new challenge. It was making me think of, I talked to someone who was at a conference recently where they had one of those kind of circle stages where a speaker stands in a circle and gives a talk, kind of a TED Talk type thing. And we were talking about how, that can be really dynamic and great, but how do you make sure you have the right speaker for that space? How do you train them to speak in that kind of way when all of us are maybe more used to standing in front of a room and talking to a PowerPoint type presentation? So it's just, it adds some new and exciting challenges, but also opportunities.
So it's a circle stage and the audience surrounds them.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I don't think I would want to do that.
I think I would just, if I were in there, I'd probably just have the audience do the wave just for fun, because I just.
We actually have a theater here in Phoenix that has that circular stage, and it just slowly moves, and it's fun to go see concerts there, but yeah, it's yeah, but it is a really neat place to see concerts at. No, lectures, I'm not sure, but
yeah, it's like Hamilton.
But for teaching, it kind of feels like a story out of like nightmares. You wake up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night because you dreamed that tomorrow your lecture takes place in this classroom you didn't know about.
We taught, when you're lecturing, make eye contact with your students, really engage them. But how do you do that when you're moving or like? I just imagine like UFO ride at the state fair, where you're inside and the whole spinning.
Oh, the Gravitron?
Yes, the Gravitron. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I guess the Gravitron would keep your students from leaving class early.
Oh, that's true.
Well, so this does remind me, though, you had mentioned like entering the classroom and how people were excited. And I often will, when I'm meeting with the advisors to develop those courses, I will ask them to try to remember like their first time on campus as a student and all the things that you were afraid of. Because I don't know about you all, but my first time as a student, I came from a small town. I was going to a big campus. Traffic was scary. Parking was scary. Trying to find my advisor was scary. And knowing what questions to ask, I don't know. And what am I allowed to ask? Like very fundamentals. I just didn't know them. So I love the idea of showing the classrooms online for a student to look at ahead of time and get comfortable. If they have any kind of anxiety, then they're able to just see everything ahead of time. And with our flipped advising courses, we always have some kind of showcase video at the beginning where the advisors are showing the environment that the students will come to, and will show the advisor's face and how they're excited to welcome them, so that students they know what to expect and they feel like they're welcome. And I didn't feel that way when I started college and saw my first advisor. So anyway, I love that we publish all of our classroom pictures online, and we have these showcase videos to help with that.
Yeah, I love that. I can't even go to a restaurant without looking at the menu ahead of time. So that really resonates with me. Let the students see you before they come in.
Well, and I think we've used so much AI with, a lot of, I know at ASU we utilize the AI chatbots a lot and, different things like that. But having that flipped advising, I think, brings in that human element and makes them realize, like, you are working with a human. Everything isn't, a bot,
So that extends to our online courses too. Like, how can we have that instructor presence even if you're not able to provide in-depth feedback on everything because it's a large enrollment course? Looking for opportunities, just even have your face on camera at the very beginning so they know who you are and that you're a real human.
Those weekly announcements, of kind of vlogging from your cell phone where you're at, introducing this week's module or flip videos, or, there's lots of different ways to accomplish this. And we just try to encourage faculty and advisors to be, people, to demonstrate that you're a person, that you are willing to be involved in students and in their needs at the beginning of class.
Since we're getting close to the end of our time together, I wanted to kind of jump off of that point that you just made and also kind of tie it to some of the other things we talked about here, where I don't even think we've explicitly said these words yet, but I feel like everything we've talked about today has really centered around creating more equitable learning environments for our students. And I don't think anyone's even said the word equity yet, but we keep coming back to seeing students as whole people, seeing students as human, seeing faculty as human, focusing on those connections, knowing that everyone comes with their own unique background and needs and fears and excitements. I just feel really enriched and hopeful for the future of higher ed after talking to all of you today. So thank you so much for giving me that feeling to walk away with.
Isn't it nice when you remember that we're all human?
Yeah. Right.
I love that. We're talking about AI and then it comes back to, but these are the
humanity
things that we have to offer. So I'm inspired. I love that.
Yeah.